So in the story of the birth of Christ, obviously we have reference made clearly to like a manger, a place where animals were kept. One of the things we need to do is try to decouple the imagery that we have in our minds of that from our sort of Western art history. We see the stories a little bit off, and at the end of the Bible, we really want to correct some of that, and we want people to just have an accurate historical envisioning of what things look like. Well, again, our artists, going back a few hundred years, when they heard Jesus born in a stable, they looked around wherever they were, again, Italy, France, Germany, countries like that, and they're like, well, there's a barn. That's what a barn looks like. And barns in those parts of the world were often big, giant wood beam structures. Here's a wood beam barn. And so that's what they painted. Here's a wood beam barn, and here's Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the animals in it. And probably if you have a nativity scene at your house, it looks something like that. The problem is that's completely 100% inaccurate. Okay? Now, I lived in this country for 24 years. I've driven all over it. And to the best of my memory, I can think of maybe one, I don't really think I can think of two wooden structure in the whole country. In this country, the vast majority of wood is going to be olive wood. There are some taller, thinner trees, but they're just not enough to do primary construction out of them. So it's not done. What we do have a lot of is limestone. The whole country is limestone, and 90% of it or more is limestone. Limestone is everywhere. This whole country is mountains and hills. It's all rugged and jagged. And so if you want to build, you build the materials at hand, which is stone, okay? Now let's roll the clock back to the time of Mary and Joseph and Jesus. And if you wanted to build a house back then, what that meant was you had to cut stones. You had to get, a hammer and a chisel, and you had to cut, and you cut a stone, and then you would place it, and then you go get some more stone, and you would cut it, and you would place it, and on, and on, and on, cutting and placing stone. Now, what you have to know is that any place that's made of limestone is gonna have lots of caves. Limestone is water permeable, and it is also, to a certain extent, water soluble, which is why over time, holes will sort of bore themselves out of it. Almost all the world's major cave networks are in limestone, okay? So this land is absolutely full. There's caves everywhere. It is very, very common for people to have caves in their property, even till now. What ancient people would do is if they saw a place like this, where you have this rock coming down, okay, and it's thick, above, and you have this hole underneath, this cave that we're in, then what they would think is, if we build directly above this, then we can use the cave for additional storage, and it's free. We don't have to do all the work of making it a structure this large. So you build a stone house on top, and down here, you would seal off a couple of these holes, leave one entrance, and you keep your animals down here, thus referring to it as a stable. You can keep grain in a place like this, and even personal goods can be stored here with no additional labor. And so I would argue strongly that there's no doubt, and even Church Nativity is actually built over a place just like this. So in this, the Catholic and Greek Orthodox churches would be in agreement that Jesus was born in a cave, very much like this. The next thing you have to know that is different than how most of us envision the Nativity is that I don't believe at all that Mary and Joseph ran around town looking for a hotel, okay? The word that is translated by the King James Inn, I think that was really a mistranslation. And if you go back and, fact check me, if you go and look at most modern translations, you're gonna see the word they use now is guest room or guest house or some variation like that. Now, if you got to know why was Joseph here? He was here because they had called a census and everyone had to go to their hometown to be counted. This was his hometown. If this is Joseph's hometown, that means he had family here. And in the ancient world, even in the modern Middle Eastern world, if you come to your hometown, your family has the obligation to host you. It is not optional. Your family must provide hospitality. Above and beyond that, if you tried to go to a hotel, your family would be offended and say, why are you doing that? We have space, you don't like us? I think it is beyond question. I feel certain that Joseph was in a family home. Now, when it says, when it came time for her to give birth, there was no room, what that means is this. It means that Lots of people had come to town. The family home was full, and no one wants to give birth in front of 14 or 15 people. And so to create privacy for her, they would have brought her down to a place like this. They would have cleaned a section of it for her. They would have used straw or whatever cloth, what other materials were available to make it comfortable for her. And there she gave birth, okay? I believe strongly that's how it happened. That's what went down. So it wasn't as stable, it was amongst the animals, but it wasn't quite as horribly uncared for as some of the modern imagery that we get. And I think that also accounts for the reason that they stayed on for a couple of years. Later when the wise men showed up and Mary and Joseph had to flee, Herod killed all the children from 2 and down. So it seems that they had been here for a while. Long enough for the wise men in Persia to see it, put together an expedition, walk thousands of miles and get here. It wasn't the next weekend, It seems they were here for quite some time before departing, and I think that also will be in the context of they had family here. So Joseph could step right into a family business, begin to work and support his wife and children.
Experience the Bible in a brand new way. Tag along on a guided, in-depth exploration of biblical sites as we peel back the layers of history and tradition to grow your faith and discover the truth at the center of the greatest story ever told.